In this example, we're going to use the Walt Disney stock to show an additional type of graphical display for qualitative data. You can see here that there is a table on the screen which is showing the movement of Walt Disney stock for 3 randomly selected trading days. In other words, they followed the stock and they checked it whether it went down, or up, or no change. So here we have the data. I want to create, using this data, a frequency and relative frequency table, a bar graph, and we're going to add a second graph onto our understanding of qualitative data. So let's go over to our StatCrunch window. And here in the Disney column is all the data that we just saw from that table. Remember, the data in this column is considered raw data. If I want to create a table, a frequency and relative frequency table for this data, then I'm going to go to Stat, Table, Frequency. Scroll down here in the column and select Disney. Now, because I want to look at both the frequency and relative frequency, I'm just going to go ahead and add both of those to my statistic that I want to look at the same time. We're going to hit compute, and we can see here that I have a table of both the count for each of the categories as well as the proportion of times that category occurred. Remember, the table we're creating is only when you have raw data. I don't need to create a table that summarizes that data if it's given to me in a summarized form, like in the previous example. So how do I go about creating a bar graph for this data? Let's create a relative frequency for our Disney data. Because it's just data and not summarized yet, I'm going to choose the with data option. Selecting the Disney column, and we're going to look at the relative frequency instead of just frequency. Hit compute, and you can see that I have the column showing up here. If I hover my mouse over each of the columns, I get an understanding of exactly the proportion of times that that particular column occurred. Now, another type of, let's stay on bar graphs for just a minute. There is a particular type of bar graph that's called a Pareto bar graph, P-A-R-E-T-O. A Pareto bar graph, and all that type of bar graph is a graph that's been ordered. So if I go back and edit this display here, I can change the order of my graph by selecting Count Ascending. So I want my graph to now show me the bars in order from least to greatest. So coming back here, I've still have a bar graph. I can still compare one graph to another, or one bar to another, I should say, but a Pareto bar graph is simply ordering that graph so that maybe I can quickly see which one had the most, which one had the least. It's also really easy for me to see that down is greater than the up, even though I could hover my mouse over it and clearly see the numbers. If I don't have that and I just want to quickly look at it, sometimes an ordered bar graph called a Pareto bar graph is helpful. So the second type of graphical display that we do want to talk about, however, is not a bar graph, but instead it's going to be a pie chart. Now, the pie chart we're going to create, since we're talking about our Disney data, is going to have to come from the with data option. You would choose with summary if this was a table. And the Disney column is the one I'm going to look at. And then I don't really mess with anything else within this pop-up box, and I'm going to hit compute. So here you can see we have a pie graph that's showing me the same data we were just talking about. So when would you use a pie chart over a bar graph? Well, whenever you want to look at the whole, like one piece out of the entire puzzle, you typically will use a pie chart. And if I want to compare two things or three things to each other, when I'm comparing categories to each other, I'm going to choose a bar graph. So there is an appropriate time for picking one particular graph, bar graph, over pie graph. Let's look at one more example showing that on the next screen. Here we've got a pie graph, pie chart. And in this pie chart, I get a sense of maybe bachelor's degrees to all of the degrees that are out there. Okay. But it's really difficult to compare, let's say, high school diplomas in this piece of the pie to bachelor's degrees or even some college in this piece of the pie. In fact, without the numbers there, I might even start to question, is one piece of the pie larger than the other? How much larger is it than the other? Here for the no high school graduate, so in this purple piece of the pie here, we can see it represents 12% of the overall educational attainment, which is roughly half of the high school diploma piece of the pie. But my eye is not really able to discern that the purple piece is actually approximately half of this greeny teal colored piece. So if I'm comparing categories to each other, a pie graph is not the best display. Instead, a bar graph is going to be the better display. Pie charts are useful typically when we want to think of one possible value out of the entire picture.